Hello again, Miss Nicholas. I'm going to talk to you today about sexual dimorphism in the human skeleton. So first let's define these terms so we know exactly what we're talking about. Bear with me while I try to get the pen up and running. Let's hope that it does so. Not yet. Pen. Alright, got it. Okay, sexual dimorphism. When you see di as a prefix, that should tell you something. That should tell you that there are two, and ism is a condition, so that just leaves us with morph. Somebody tell me what morph means. Yeah, you've probably all watched enough cartoons, you've heard about something morphing. Well, most people think that means change. It does not mean change. Morph means shape. Okay, so the morphology of something is the shape of something. So sexual dimorphism, the condition of having two different shapes that are based on gender. And that's what we're looking at today, the differences in the male and the female skeleton. So I thought, as I was looking, I tried to find something cute to put on here, and I found this little cartoon, or this little diagram here of differences in the male and female brain. You can look at this all you want, but there's a couple of things on here I thought were pretty interesting. The I told you so gland on the female, quite large. Let's see, realization of wants versus needs. Man, that's a really small place, right? Sort of compared to the listening particle on the male, and the ironing skills, domestic skills, toilet aiming. Yeah, you get the picture. Anyway, just wanted to give you a little something there to break the ice and get your brain warmed up. Alright, so let's begin by talking about differences in the male and female skeleton. There are quite a few differences that should be pretty obvious. First of all, males have a greater bone mass and greater bone density. So the bones on males are slightly thicker and tend to be larger and also longer. And the density, or the mass, how much stuff there is within those bones and as a part of those bones, tends to be greater in the male as well. There are several specific things that we'll talk about a little bit as well. The pubic arch is very different, and we'll look at the pelvic bones in just a minute when you're looking at male versus female, as well as the pelvic cavity, the size and shape of the sacrum and the coccyx. But there are other differences that we'll see when we look at the skull. There's several differences there. The women tend to have a more narrow rib cage and smaller teeth. And as I said, several things on the skull. So let's start looking at some of those specific density or specific differences by looking at these bones. Okay, so you've got two different views of two different pelvises. Okay, so if you look at this one on the top, okay, let's look here first. You can see this opening, okay, and then compare to this opening. Alright, you should see that this bottom one is more narrow, while at the top it is a bit more rounded. Look at this particular bone right here, which is the coccyx, commonly called the tailbone. You see on this particular pelvis, it's tilted toward the front. Of course, here's the front of the pelvis here. Okay, so that's your pubic symphysis, that little fibrocartilaginous pad. And on this particular skeleton, the one at the top, you can see the coccyx is pushed back a bit more. So a couple of differences there. Also, you see there's quite a bit of a flare out that you can also see here and here on this particular pelvis. So it's like the top part, or the ilium, is flared out more to create a wider opening. Let's look at this particular structure right here. Okay, this is the pubic arch. Okay, the pubic arch on this particular pelvis is very obtuse, to where the angle is very acute on this particular one. Okay, acute means that it forms a sharper angle. Obtuse is less sharp. So think now, if you haven't already, about why there would be a difference in male and female pelvises. I'm sure you're all smart folks. You can figure out what has to happen, right? The female, of course, carries that developing embryo that becomes the developing fetus that is going to need to be delivered. And, of course, the uterus is sitting up in here, going to expand and hold that baby, but then the baby has to pass through this opening in the pelvic cavity. Okay? So look at these two that we've been comparing and try to figure out which one you think it would have an easier time getting through. Could you pass a baby through the top one or the bottom one with more ease? Hopefully you realize that the one at the top is female and the one at the bottom is the male. Okay, so you've got this flare out to the hips, more straight up and down here. That also contributes to the differences in the way that the males and females walk. Think about, you've got that acetabulum right here and right here. Alright, so the acetabulum is that cup-like structure that the head of the femur is going to sit in. Okay, so on the male, that acetabulum is a little bit more straight. The head of the femur fits in there. Okay, and then the femur pretty much comes straight down. Okay, on the female, the head of the femur goes in more at an angle. Okay, so the bone itself is a little more angled in its orientation. Now, that's not to say that the bones on the female go like this, but the way that they actually sit in the hip causes them to be tilted a bit more. Therefore, the hips swing a bit more as the female walks. Learn all kinds of interesting things, huh? Okay, so be sure that you can recognize the difference in the male and the female pelvis. Now, let's talk a little bit about the skull. Now, when you're looking at the differences in the male and female skull, there are many of these, and some of these you'll be able to see on some of our skull models in the lab. But let's look at some of these basic differences. First, as you read A, the male cranial mass is more blocky and massive. The female is rounded and tapered. Okay, so you're looking here. Okay, sort of square and blocky, more rounded and more feminine in appearance. The female supraorbital margin. Let's break that word down. You should have seen it in lab already, but just in case you haven't, tell me what supra means. No, supra means above. I know you knew that. And orbital, of course, is the socket that the eyeballs fit in. So the supraorbital margin on females is sharper. On males, it's round and dull. So you're looking at the supraorbital margin here. More sharp, you can actually feel this just under your eyebrows. And on the male, it's a little more blunt, a little more dull. The zygomatic bone is the cheekbone. Okay, so on females, that's where you put your blush, you know. Okay, so it's the bone that forms the cheekbone here. The zygomatic bone is more pronounced in the male, which means it sticks out more. It's more prominent. You can see it. Okay, so here is the zygomatic bone on the female. A little less pronounced, doesn't stick out quite as far. The mandible, you remember what the mandible is? Okay, that jawbone. The mandible on the male is more squared. Males typically have that square masculine jawline, while the female has the more feminine rounded jaw. Males have a deeper cranial mass. That simply means that from the front to the back is typically longer on the male than the female. Okay, so the head is longer this way. The skull is longer this way. The superciliary arch is large and pronounced in the male. All right, superciliary. We're talking about this little area right here as compared to this area on the female. It's also, just below that, the little flat part is called the glabella. But you can see on the male, or you could if I hadn't written on it. Let me just erase that so you can see it a little better. There we go. Now, you can see on the male, it does tend to extend out a bit more. Males also have larger teeth. Okay, so, oops, still on the eraser. Alright, so males tend to have larger teeth. The female teeth are smaller, more feminine in appearance. Let's see. Now, you can't see it very well on these skulls. Let me go to the next slide and take a quick peek. Don't see it very well on these either because I don't have a posterior view. Go back and look right here. You don't really see a lot of it here, but this little bump right there, just above that dot, is called the mastoid process. On the male skulls, most of the time, this is more massive. You can see this is a bit larger than this one. This is the bump that you feel back behind your ears. You can feel that mastoid process on yourself. On males, it is more pronounced in most cases. And also, there is large occipital condyles on the males tend to be larger and more pronounced. And a ridge on the occipital bone as well is more pronounced on the males. So now let's look just briefly at these two pictures. Of course, instead of looking at a cartoon, you're simply looking at the real version of this, and you can see the things that we talked about. Got that square jaw versus the round jaw, big teeth versus the smaller teeth, okay? That sharp border here versus more of a flat, dull border here. You can see more pronounced ridges here. Not so much so on the female. You can see that the calvarium, the skull cap, is more square, and here it's more round. You can see that zygomatic bone really sticking out as compared to not quite so much so. So there are several differences that you see in the male versus female skeleton. Be sure that you pay some attention to these things when you're looking at these bones in lab. When you pick up a bone, whether it's a real bone or one of our fake bones, look at it and see if there's anything on it that might lend you to wonder, does this belong to a male or a female? When you're studying from the skeletons that we have in there as well, look at those and see if you can find some of the differences and be aware of those and be able to point those out. You're going to learn lots and lots and lots of features and different structures on these bones, but don't be intimidated by it. There's a lot of things to learn. But it's really pretty simple once you learn what some of the terminology means. And believe me, once you learn these bones, it's really going to help you when you start studying your muscles and your blood vessels in 202, because a lot of them are named according to the bones they're associated with. All right, guys, y'all have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you again soon.